So, Mark chapter 16. So, finally, we come to the final chapter. It is not very easy. So, before the resurrection, you need to experience death. Yet, a lot of people are trapped in the death. Even the living beings are trapped in the death. At the very start of this chapter, we are told that quite a few women they would like to anoint the body of Jesus. So, and this is the story of resurrection. Actually, they are not going to meet. Actually, they are not going to meet the resurrected Jesus Christ. They would like to look for the dead body of Jesus Christ to anoint him. So the overall concept, the overall concept is still about the dead person. Before they arrived at the grave, the tomb, and then suddenly they realized that, well, there was a very big stone. How were they going to roll it away? So it seems that this very big stone was blocking these women from reaching the body of Jesus Christ. Yes, for very sure that by our own strength we could not roll away this big stone. So every one of us actually is blocked by this big stone. That's why we cannot see the resurrected Jesus Christ. So a lot of us are still trapped by their own experience of this big stone. Yes, it's true that they would like to see Jesus Christ, but for them, Jesus Christ was only a dead person. So our overall concept was still trapped in this dead person. So that's why it is very difficult for us to believe resurrection. A lot of people use the rationality to convince themselves. Or maybe because of what the other people has been saying, then they believed. Yet inside their hearts, they still had a very big stone. So that's why today we would like to see how the disciples of Jesus believed Jesus finally, and how did they finally work with the resurrected Christ to preach the gospel all over the world. So the topic is the resurrection which will change the whole world. It is not easy at all. So let us really help us to deal with, to get rid of this concepts of death, the concepts of not believing resurrection, and ask Jesus to roll away the big stone from our hearts so that we can stay connected with our resurrected Jesus Christ. So in the first one, verse 1, when the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. All these women really love Jesus so much. They've been waiting for the Sabbath day, so they could not do anything. So when the Sabbath was over, in the very early morning, so they brought along the spices early in the morning to anoint Jesus' body because it was not anointed yet. Because the day that Jesus died was the day before the Sabbath day. So that's why the women could not do anything. So they were in a rush to receive the body of Jesus Christ and then to put him in the tomb. So we need to refer to chapter 15 for a few incidents. So the first session, I'll name it Incredible Resurrection. So if you could identify the incredibility of Jesus' resurrection, then you could be the disciples of Jesus Christ. if you believe it too easily, then you might not realize that you need to take a big leap of faith to go into this religion, of resurrection, because this resurrection is about to change the whole world. So we need to refer to chapter 15 for a few sessions, which are related to all these women who brought along the spices. So the first one is chapter 15, the verse 40. So you can find that Mark has been mentioning all these names of the women. They are not only the onlookers, the bystanders. So in a big crowd, and Mark could pay attention to all these few women, so that's why he could name them. In verse 40, in chapter 15, so some women were watching from a distance. Actually, they were fearful, but in comparison with Jesus' disciples, they were staying in the scene. So actually, it's very horrible that Jesus was crucified on the cross. Every disciple was very fearful and was protecting himself, and they fled. Yet, for all these women, even though they were watching from a distance, but anyway, they stayed in the scene. They still stayed with Jesus Christ. They still stayed with Jesus Christ who was crucified. So all these names in verse 40, chapter 15, were the same names here in the verse 1. So Mary Magdalene. Magdalene is not a place within Jerusalem. This is not Mary Bethany. It is not the younger sister of Martha. So Magdalene actually is a small village by the Lake of Galilee. So you can say that this Mary is Galilean. So at the early stage, she followed Jesus Christ. She's been following Jesus Christ from Galilee to Jerusalem. Also, we have another mother of James as also Salome. Here we are not told that she's the mother of Jesus, but James, and Salome. So all these people appeared in the story of Jesus' resurrection. And also there were some people who were not named. So in verse 41, chapter 15, in Galilee, these women have followed him and cared for his needs. And many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem were also there. So that's why here we are told that many other women also went. So in this important scene, in this important incident, we can see that all the disciples disappeared. But those people who experienced the death of Jesus Christ were the women. They've been following Jesus to serve Jesus. They never forsook Jesus, and they were standing there. They were watching from a distance there. So verse 40 to verse 41, so that we are told that they've been staying in the scene with Jesus. They are not the bystanders or the onlookers only. They were not the bystanders or onlookers. They were paying detailed attention to what's been going on. And then later on, Joseph of Arimathea, he's the prominent member of the council. He was asking for Jesus' body to bury him. So finally, he got the body of Jesus Christ. So that's why he placed Jesus' body in a tomb cut out of the rock. Then he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. Verse 46 in chapter 15. So that this body would not be stolen by anyone, so that the body of Jesus would not be exposed to the sun or to the rain or whatever, would not be exposed openly. So his body was protected. And in verse 47, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where he was laid. Verse 47 of chapter 15. Not only did they witness the death of Jesus, they also witnessed the burial of Jesus. So throughout the processes, they were there. At the very beginning, they were watching from the distance. But by the time that Jesus was buried, they were very close to Jesus. They could recognize the tomb. They knew that there was a big stone. So that's why here we come, chapter 16 today. So in the early morning, they arrived and prepared the spices they would like to anoint the body of Jesus Christ. So at the very beginning, at the very start of the day, they arrived. So it means that they were not arriving there in the dark. So in the early morning, with the daytime, that they could see the tomb very clearly. But when they were very nearby, they got the question, so who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb for us? So you can see the harmlessness of all these women. Because no brothers were standing by, were nearby. Because all the disciples were hiding anyway. Even though all these women loved Jesus so much. So from the life of Jesus Christ to the death of Jesus Christ, so they loved Jesus, but they could never imagine the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So you saw that actually they were bringing along the spices to anoint the body of Jesus Christ, right? So it means that they couldn't believe and they didn't believe yet Jesus has resurrected. Yet by the time that they arrived at the tomb, the stone was rolled away. And so when they entered, they saw the young man, a young man. They saw a young man. Here we are told that it's a young man with youth, with vitality. So maybe he was an angel. He was dressed in a white robe. So he was very different from the rest of the people. So you might take him as an angel. You take him as an angel. Yet he was filled with vitality. He was dressed in white robe. He was shining the glory from the heaven. Once the women saw this young man, they were very scared. So at the very beginning, they were very impulsive. So when they were nearby the grave, the tomb, they were a little bit hesitant. Yet, once they found that the stone was rolled away, and then they went into the tomb, they became very short, because they saw the young man. They were expecting the corpse of Jesus Christ, but they never expected the young man, the angel of God. And this young man really understood what they were thinking. So that's why he said to them, "No fear." Because actually they were very fearful. These women were very fearful. They were very short. What's going on? How come the tomb was shining with glory? Actually, at that time, they couldn't see where Jesus was. And then this young man was saying to them, "So you are looking for Jesus, the Nazarene, who was crucified. He has risen." So actually, they could not imagine such kind of news. He was crucified, yet he has risen. He is not here. He is risen. He is not here. He is not here. So this is the resurrection. He is not here anymore. And no stone can stop him. He has resurrected. He is risen. See the place where they laid him. Verse 6. And then they look. And Mark would like to tell us the detail. So where did all these women see this young man? And this young man was actually sitting on the right side. So he could remember all these details. So he was sitting on the right side of all the wrapping cloth. So they could hear what this young man said. They were very short. And then this young man said to them, "Come and you see the place where they laid him." To them, they were very disoriented. They were very lost. They were at a loss. Hey, how come Jesus was not here? So where was Jesus? And then this young man also understood their relationship. And then he says, so go and tell his disciples and Peter. So you can see that this young man knew all the names of the disciples. Just go and tell them, Jesus is going ahead of you into Galilee. So actually, before Jesus Christ was crucified, Jesus had told them about this. So Jesus is going ahead of them into Galilee. So Galilee was the place where they gathered them. Galilee was the place where they asked them to follow them. So there you will see Jesus. So that was the place near Capernaum. And there you will see Jesus, just as Jesus had told you before. So what was the response of all these women? So they were running away, and they went out, and they fled from the tomb. And here we are told that they were running out, they fled. And they were trembling, and they were bewildered, and they could not believe it. So that's why they said nothing to anyone. Actually, the young man asked them to tell everything to the disciples, but they were too fearful to say anything. This is the first section. That is the unbelievable, the incredible resurrection. And then verse 9 to verse 15. That is the process of believing the resurrection. That is the process that the disciples believe the resurrection. So a lot of people might think that the book of Mark will end in verse 8, because a lot of early manuscripts said that the book of Mark just end in verse 8. So some people may say that from verse 9 to verse 20. So some people think that all these verses were added afterwards. So there are two kinds of philosophy. There are two kinds of theories, I would say. There are two kinds of assumption. Okay, one would say that the book of Mark just rested here in verse 8. Probably Mark was martyred. So that's why for the rest of the scriptures, he didn't write down. He didn't pen down. But another possibility was that. And some people might have added all this information to it. And you imagine if the book of Mark just ended here. And then all the women just was too fearful to say anything. And then we will have this book of Mark. Then we will be knowing what's been happening afterwards. So that means that everything just finished there, and nobody say anything. Nobody say anything about what's been happening after Jesus' resurrection. Then what's the point of the book of Mark? So of course, if we add all this information to it, it is the completion for the overall book of Mark, and then the logic will be very smooth. So of course, in the first part, we were told that the women were too fearful, but later on, we were told that, and when all these women told the disciples, and the disciples were crying. They were crying, mourning, and weeping. Yes, when they heard that Mary Magdalene and all these women witnessed Jesus who has resurrected, yet they did not believe them. Yet they did not believe them. So that's what's going on after Jesus' resurrection. So actually, the women didn't really see Jesus face to face. They only saw the angel. And the angels asked them and then commanded them to spread this news to the disciples. So in this part, the disciples did not believe what the women said. And then verse 12 to verse 13. And then we were told that there were two persons on the way back home country. They met Jesus. And Jesus showed him to them. And then Jesus asked them to tell all the rest of the disciples. Yet all the disciples did not believe them. So now let's come to the third section. So the women did not believe, the disciples did not believe, and also the people who believed, the people who met Jesus, and then they told the disciples about it, but the disciples did not believe either. So you can tell from so far up here, a lot of people, or I would say all the people did not believe that Jesus have resurrected. Actually, in all generations, all the peoples could not find it so easy to believe Jesus' resurrections. Jesus have mentioned a few times before his resurrection, before his death, that he would suffer, but he will also resurrect. Yet a lot of disciples could not comprehend it at all. They could not accept all these words at all. So it's very difficult for them to believe that Jesus would suffer and would suffer and would be killed, and above all, they could not believe that he would resurrect from the death, because all these are beyond the human experience. So even though they might have heard it, but they could not listen to it with the faith. They could not receive it with the faith. So that's why they could not comprehend the glory of Jesus' resurrection. So that's why the disciples were very confused at that time. They could not take it so easily. Actually, at that time, before that, Jesus had prepared their hearts for it already. Because why? Because one day Jesus would show himself to them in glory. Not only would we hear from Jesus, but also they will witness the resurrected Jesus Christ with their own physical eyes as well. Yet at that very moment of time, they could not receive it, they could not understand it. They could not comprehend what Jesus had told them before. So they are still using their rationality. They are still using their own experience to think about it. But by the time they come here, they still could not believe it. Book of Mark was written in 80 or 90 years after Christ. So they've been experiencing a lot of persecutions in the Roman church. Why would they persecute at that time? So I tell you, if you do not believe the resurrection of Jesus Christ, there will not be any persecution at all. It is all because you persist in believing that Jesus has resurrected. And that's why you encountered all these kind of sufferers and the persecutions. So you could not deny it. You could not ignore it. Then that is the time that you receive all these kind of persecutions because of your faith. After the persecution, after you have been experiencing all this suffering with Jesus Christ, then you will at the same time, in the same way, that you will believe the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and then you will experience the glory of God as well. If you did not believe that resurrection is something glorious, if you do not believe that this is a part of the experience after the suffering, then you will not be willing to experience the suffering. If you do not have this reassurance of resurrection, then you will not be willing to go into the suffering. But for the Christians at that time, but for all these Christians being persecuted at that time, could you imagine how they believed Jesus Christ at the start? So they heard of the gospel shared by the disciples, by the apostles at that time. So from the lives of the apostles, they could see the life of Jesus Christ. They could see the resurrected Jesus Christ being with them. So because they could have experienced all the signs and wonders and miracles, and that's why they could understand that the resurrected Jesus Christ was real. And that's why they were willing to pay the price for the resurrected Jesus Christ. It is not talking about the integrity of a person. It is all because I experienced it, I could witness it, so that's why I could not hide my conscience. It is all because that you believe with faith that after all this suffering, that you experience the resurrection. So this is a kind of big encouragement to the Christians being persecuted at that time. So that's why the Christians at that time, they'd been standing forward and proclaim their faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, that they were the Christians. So when it comes to the time of the persecution, we can tell very easily who are the genuine Christians, who are the nominal Christians. If you are only the nominal Christians, then you cannot survive all this suffering. So this is not only a nominal faith. This is a genuine experience of faith. So that's why they are willing to dedicate their lives to follow Jesus Christ, because they know that after the suffering, they will experience the glory of resurrection. But for the Roman Christians, so they also, for the Roman Christians, some of them could not believe it either. Actually, in the days of Jesus, they could not believe it either. So that's why they could understand how difficult and how impossible the resurrection of Jesus Christ was. But later on, how did he believe? So that is the third event of this passage in verse 14. In verse 14, Jesus appeared to them as they were eating. so they could witness Jesus with their own eyes. But Jesus rebuked them for their lack of faith. Because right before that, we are told that they were lacking in faith until in the scriptures that they met Jesus Christ. And they got a stubborn heart. Every one of us was somehow very stubborn as well. Because this resurrection issue were beyond our understanding, beyond our experience. So Jesus rebuilt them with the purpose to unfold, to open up their mind. Because they couldn't believe those who had seen him after he had risen. So the one being rebuked were the disciples at that time. So we could believe, we could deduct that for all those believers that the disciples had shared the Gospels with them, they could not believe it either. But now Jesus appeared to them. Not only did he appear to them, actually Jesus appeared to a lot of the other people as well. For example, to Joseph Arimathea. And when he knew that Jesus' body disappeared, because he was the one to put Jesus' body in the tomb, because he was the one to roll the stone before the grave. When he heard of this news, I do believe that he got a very intense feeling, because he was the centurion. So I believe that he was one of the early members of the Roman soldier or Roman officers who could believe Jesus' resurrection. When the people learned of this news of resurrection, when this Joseph learned of the news of resurrection, he was very shocked because it was too shocking for people to believe, including all the disciples, but actually not only them. But the women believed. The Joseph of Arimathea, he believed, and even the council members also believed that Jesus resurrected. So there was a movie about this member of the council, how he believed Jesus Christ. It was a wonderful movie as well. So now we come to the last session now. That is from verse 15 to 20. That is to co-work with the resurrected Jesus Christ to spread the gospel. Co-work is very important. Jesus did not only send them away or not only ask them to go, because Jesus told them very clearly that Jesus asked them to preach, and Jesus worked with them and confirmed his word by the signs and that accompany it. So even though in the book of Mark, Mark didn't write down anything about that Jesus will be with them until the ends of the day, or ask them to do the work until the ends of the earth. But here, all creation in verse 15, go into all the world and preach the good news to all creation. Because why the all creation need to experience the renewal from this resurrection. But this resurrection would have the biggest impact upon the lives of Jesus, upon the lives of disciples. So they are willing to receive this commission. So this commission was to ask them to go into all the world to preach the good news to all creation. So they went to Rome to preach the gospel. They went to Samaria and Jesus was with them. So they went to Rome and Jesus was with them. So wherever the disciples went to preach the gospel, and Jesus was right there with them, because Jesus was co-working with them. And in verse 17, we are told that these signs will accompany those who believe in Jesus' name. I would like to rectify the words here. So I will say, those who believe that the miracles of the resurrected Jesus Christ will be accompany them. If you don't have any relationship with this resurrected Jesus Christ, then I will say all these signs and wonders were a kind of magics only. They were only a kind of magics only. But here we are told that we are confirmed that the resurrection of Jesus Christ was with the disciples. Verse 20. Then the disciples went out and preached everywhere. So here is the main point. The Lord worked with them and confirmed his word by the signs that accompanied it. It was Jesus who enabled them to do the signs and wonder. Because why? Because the resurrected Jesus Christ are co-working with them. So that's why all the signs and wonder will follow them. This is not the magic. It is all because the resurrected Jesus Christ was being with them. So that's why they could perform all these signs and wonders. And that's why their words were confirmed. So this resurrection message has the impact on this world. And this is the ending of the book of Mark. The resurrected Jesus Christ. His heart was to embrace the world. First of all, he will roll away the big stone from the hearts of the disciples. So because all of them need to experience the resurrected Jesus Christ personally, to experience the presence of Jesus Christ, to experience the resurrected Jesus Christ who is being with them. And they need to experience the co-working with the Lord Jesus Christ. So that's why we're here told that everywhere they go and they preach everywhere. And what kind of gospel did they preach? They were preaching the gospel of Mark. That was the account of what Jesus Christ has been doing. So these are the accounts of what Jesus Christ has been doing. They were not talking about the Jesus Christ before death. They were preaching the gospel of the resurrected Jesus Christ. So they were doing even much greater things than before. Whatever they preached before. So of course now through the mouths of the disciples they kept saying, but they kept preaching it with the power of the resurrected Jesus Christ to bless every followers. He knows that we are unable by our own selves. But now we are told that the presence of our Lord Jesus Christ is with every one of us.